Welcome everyone. If you can hear me, I hope we're going now live here now. We are this what is today? Today is the 25th of September. IBSI's Forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. We are here live. We are going on everything, I believe, except for Clubhouse. So for those of you who usually tune in on Clubhouse, not only is it not going, but for some reason I am not. Go to the room. Sure, go to the room right now. All right, I think we'll go tonight. All right, so now I believe we are on. I think my my son Joshua, who I may have woken up, who is in Paris right now, out there painting the town and doing this thing. My apologies again, running a little bit behind. I was teaching a class and I had to go from the class to here, but I'm so glad to be with you on today. And I'm looking at something here. I hope I did my camera the right way so that you can see. Where's the other thing? My staff was helping me. You know, I need all kinds of help here. And they were telling me that I was reversed or whatever, the things were reversed, and so I hope it's working right now this time. I hope so. We'll see in a moment. But anyway, welcome again to the weekly forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. I am Dumisani Washington, the CEO and founder of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. So glad to be with you here on today. Apparently, I think we're good. Someone give me a thumbs up, staff, if we're good with the chat on Clubhouse public. Not that it's just on, but it's actually public as well. I think we're good. It says we're muted on Clubhouse. Okay, I'm muted on Clubhouse. Let me unmute on Clubhouse. Let me do this there. Boom. All right, got you there. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I don't know why my chat had disappeared there. So welcome, everyone. We have so much to do today that I'm pretty sure we're not going to get to all of it, but we'll get as much as we can. Again, welcome here to the weekly forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. There's so much that is happening, and there's so much that intersects with this topic, whether it goes to Israel, Africa, or the Black and Jewish communities connection. And some of us a little, well, we don't ever try to be quote unquote controversial, but obviously there's some topics that we're going to have to kind of touch on here today. First of all, I want to give a shout out. She may or may not be seeing this because I don't see all of my channels up here, but Pastor Matrilla Hall of Faith to Grace Ministries Incorporated in, well, the Atlanta area. This is not exactly Atlanta, but it's the Atlanta area there. Shout out to you, to your husband, Kendrick Conley. Thank you, Conley in Conley, Georgia. Valerie and I had a wonderful time. We were there leading the Africa's and Black America's prophetic call to Zion. We had the live event there in Conley, Georgia, hosted by Pastor Matrilla Hall of, again, Faith to Grace Ministries. We had a wonderful, wonderful time with them there. We'll be doing it online with pastors as well. If you want to know more about that, go to ibsi.org. ibsi.org. You can get even more information about what we are doing here. I'm here. Hello, Pastor Hall. I see she's there in the house. Again, thank you so much, woman of God. We had a wonderful time. We're looking forward to connecting with you all some more. We have pastor friends also there in the Alabama area, and I believe that there may be a Faith to Grace campus in Alabama. I can't remember which city, but we'll try to connect all those. I see our friend, one of our Jewish friends, Brother Fred Hayward, out there in California, just having a quick break from Yom Kippur services at my synagogue. Love you, brother. Love you too, Fred. Much love to you and the community out there. Miss you all. I've known Fred for several years now in my work with Christians United for Israel. I was from Stockton, California. Fred's out there in Sacramento. And the Jewish communities and Christian communities come together, have such amazing times together all the time. And so we're just looking forward to being there. Actually, we're in Tyrone, Georgia. Thank you. I see a message to me. I'm getting used to these messages here, y'all. We're getting it. Tyrone, Georgia is where Faith to Grace Ministries is. So if you're in the Atlanta area, there in Tyrone, Georgia, is where Faith to Grace. Go ahead and Google them. Find out about Pastor Matrilla Hall. We had a wonderful time. And their location is Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery, Alabama is where their location is in the Alabama area. Again, we had a great time. So thank you so much, Pastor Hall, for hosting us. We had a wonderful time with you. As a matter of fact, I was teaching the class. I was reminded that I need to get you the information about that Hebrew congregation that's based in Chicago, Rabbi Capers Funay, and all their work and their history. That I'll send you some of those links so you can be aware of them as well. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Again, if you are here, if you're on Clubhouse, go ahead and share that, ping someone, let them know that we're there. wherever you're seeing this, whether it's on Twitter, on Facebook, on there. Those of you who are there on Instagram. Hello, everyone. Good to have you here with us. We're going to dive in here and deal with some of these topics that are actually happening in and all around us. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do this a little bit of a different way. I think, Maria, I'm probably going to start with. I'm going to start with this the Black Lives Matter part of it. Again, that's not the main focus, but there was something that had happened here recently as this continues to unfold. Again, multiple times we told you about what's going on in post BLM Oakland and the real struggles that are happening there in a very real way. But I do want to start in California. So let me do this. Let's start with let's start with this first. I'm going to do number 2 first, Maria, instead of number 1, the robot cop. So in San Francisco, it was announced back in the late fall of last year that there were robot cops that the city had already had set up and were beginning to patrol. And the controversy around it was that they could be armed with lethal force, right? So there would be these robotic cops that could patrol the area. And you see the link is up there now. And they could be armed with lethal force. That was a bridge too far. So apparently the leaders decided to not arm them with lethal force, but that they would table it for a little bit later on, right? And so one of the things we were saying, we're starting here? We're starting here because it's very much tied to the work of, unfortunately, the Black Lives Matter organization that ran amok. It was supposed to be about law enforcement and better police practices and justice and everything. And it was very quickly about money. It's about anti-Semitism, as I've said before. And here, it just, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it's the gift that keeps on giving, right? So it was announced a little while ago. I mean, back in the fall, right? And they're still in terms about the robot cops, and there's robot cops in New York and other cities, right? They're turning their part of we were saying the mindset of this whole Marxist communist mindset to destabilize so that draconian measures can be put in place and everybody clamor for it. In other words, lawlessness in Oakland, lawlessness in San Francisco, in LA, in Baltimore. You have homicides through the roof. We talked about that on last week as well. There was a study that was done that measured for the Black Lives Matter protests between 2014 and 2019. And according to this study, we did it last week, they calculated that some 3,000 more homicides happened because of the police pulling back and all the demonization of the police and all these things that Black Lives Matter was so much a part of, right? The spearhead of this whole thing, right? So we're saying that part, unfortunately, of this Marxist training of those who are the leaders of Black Lives Matter, like Patrisse Cullors, who stepped down, who said that we are trained Marxists, is to destabilize democracies. And one of the things that it does is it allows the leaders then to put in place almost like a martial law, that because lawlessness abounds and people say, oh my God, you have to stop these killings and these destruction, which is true. They go, hey, how about this? We'll put cops on the street. Let them be able to kill people, and that's going to fix everything, right? Wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Can I be real? Let me be honest. I would rather have a very well-trained police officer, especially if it's a hostile situation, than a robot that's calculating whether or not it's going to use lethal force and potentially kill somebody. Let me just be real, right? Oh, you're against technology. I'm just going to be real. I'm trying to understand that if you are a Black Lives Matter that's lamenting and talking about how Black folks are treated by law enforcement, why you think robots is a good idea, right? So what actually happened when I saw the Black Lives Matter account tweeted their tepid disapproval, right? The link that Maria put there, thank you, ma'am. Whoever controls their account. So the Al Jazeera Plus, and some folks were tripping on the Al Jazeera. Oh, don't show Al Jazeera. I know Al Jazeera has a lot of propaganda. The point wasn't Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera was simply reporting on what many other outlets. You can just Google robot cops San Francisco. It'll come up CNN, MSNBC, and then there's left, right? I mean, it's not a secret, right? It's not being hidden, right? So Al Jazeera, and they're put on one more time from the screen one more time. And so what it says there, it says San Francisco's Board of Supervisors approved police using remote control lethal robots armed with explosives, right? San Francisco Police Department claims that the robots would be only used when lives are at stake. Critics say it further militarizes police and endangers vulnerable communities like unhoused people or homeless people, right? And then Black Lives Matter quote tweets, "These are creepy, anyway, weird, and do not make our communities more safe." I'm a passionate kind of person. Thank you, Maria. And I basically told them, you need to go sit down. You, Black Lives Matter, helped bring us here to the point where they're going to arm robots with explosives and lethal force, in large part because of the mayhem happening on the streets. People are demanding law and order. Folks from all, especially these impacted cities, especially when the bright yellow Black Lives Matter is playing right there on the street, right? While they're demonizing Israel, blaming the Israelis for the police brutality and all those other types of things, now it's so unstable that they're about to put cops on the street that can act with explosives, with lethal force. And Black Lives Matter has the nerve to say, oh, this is not going to make our communities more safe. You've made our communities unsafe, right? So you don't get to talk. Go sit down somewhere, right? So here you make it unstable, and then you want to talk about the actual things that are being put in place that will actually make it even more dangerous for many, many people. So that's the first thing I want to start with. This is the gift, again, that keeps on giving. Here you have all this pigs in the blanket, frying like bacon, pigs in the blanket, frying like bacon, Israel, you kill children, and all this other stuff that Black Lives Matter was just spouting off about, right? Demonizing the cops, defund the police, deadly exchange, all these types of things that have not served to make anyone safer. It has made it more dangerous. And so now these same cities are talking about putting robots armed with lethal force. And here come Black Lives Matter. I want to talk about how that's not a good idea. You think? Right. And who's paying for it? Not the leaders of Black Lives Matter. Who's paying for it? The people on the street in these areas like Oakland, where it's the wild, they said themselves, the wild, wild west. Like the rabbi down there in the area of LA there, and I said it before, that was ransacked by Black Lives Matter LA. And he talked about it was like crystal knock all over again. People are coming there, and they're Fairfax, thank you, the Fairfax area of LA. And they're there talking about kill the Jew and spray painting on yeshivas and synagogues, all that kind of stuff. That stuff has nothing to do with justice, ladies and gentlemen. And we called it out from the beginning. So I'm starting there and letting you know you can follow those stories, right? Those of you in those cities, I encourage you to continue to be active with your city supervisors and your city councils, just like the city councils who voted to actually defund police, even though that there was a study done that the vast majority of Black folks did not want the cops defunded, but actually wanted more police presence, right? Good quality police presence. So ladies and gentlemen, why is this a part of this? Because you are talking about haters of Israel using the Black community and just communities in general for their own vitriolic purposes, for their own propaganda. And what is the results? We are dealing with the results now. We are living with the results of that mayhem now. That's why it's so important that our voices are raised. This is why what IBSI does when it's standing with Israel and Jewish people and it's speaking truth to power where the Palestinian human rights situation is concerned, and we're rebuking those forces that would use the Black community for its own Jew hatred and Israel hatred, and then leave those vulnerable communities even more in a state of turmoil, more death, more destruction, less jobs, less opportunity. Jew hatred, Israel hatred is what has brought that about. This is one of the reasons why we raise our voices. One of the reasons why we know that it's so important that be brought to bear so that people are not duped by that kind of idiocy, like attacking cops and blaming Israel for it, right? This is one of the reasons why I want to bring that to your attention. Let's stay in California for a moment. California, the UC Board of Regents, one of the things that the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel did, and you go to ibsi.org and find out more about our organization. You can also donate. We are a nonprofit organization. Click on donate, ibsi.org, click on donate. All gifts are tax deductible. We joined in with 99, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel joined in with 99 other organizations, signing a letter to the UC Board of Regents expressing our concern for what is the critical ethnic studies curriculum that is this latest version, as it were, that is being considered for part of California's requirements, the UC requirements in terms of University of California. The letter written by our friends out there at AMCHA Initiative, and if I can, I'm gonna read just the first, and I can pull it up here, Marina. I'll read the first paragraph. We've signed on again, many other organizations expressing our concern. We've been following the critical ethnic studies debate and story since around 2019, 18, 19, before Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, signed this current version into law for the UC system. And later on, there's another version of it. It is anti-Semitic. It is anti-Zionist. It's not true. It doesn't in any type of adequate way cover different ethnicities in terms of history in the United States. And it was even the original versions disrespectful to the Black community, the civil rights community, dismissing them as docile and weak and all that. It is not history, ladies and gentlemen. It is propaganda. And it is deeply troubling anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic propaganda. And the link is there for those of you who want to see the actual letter itself. You can. I'm going to read just the beginning. This is the letter to the UC Board of Regents. We are 99 education, civil rights, and religious organizations who are deeply concerned about a proposal for a UC ethnic studies admission requirement that is still being considered by the UC Academic Senate, despite strenuous opposition from UC faculty and members of the public in 2022. If the proposal is ultimately approved, virtually every high school in the state will be offering ethnic studies courses based on the course criteria developed by the UC ethnic studies experts promoting this proposal. Last sentence, this is a deeply alarming prospect given the openly anti-Semitic sentiments of these experts and their own contention that anti-Zionism constitutes a core element of authentic ethnic studies. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard that right. And here again, has nothing to do with your view of Israel, Zionism, nothing like that. Teach history and not propaganda. This is propaganda that's built to brainwash the kids into seeing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through one lens, terrorism, through one lens, anti-Zionism, period. Why is that part of the social studies curriculum in the first place? And if we're going to talk about conflicts, you mean that there's no other conflicts on the planet that we can actually discuss and unpack? This is straight up anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, and ladies and gentlemen, it's not getting near the press that it needs to. And oh my goodness, we're getting ready to descend into some of the controversial stuff. It's not talked about nearly as much as it needs to. With all due respect to all my fellow friends throughout the pro-Israel community, not even in the pro-Israel community is it talked about nearly as much as it needs to be. This is brainwashing. The ethnic studies curriculum that already exists in the UC system is very bad, right? And this one has this newer version, which will be considered part of the requirements to get into the UC system. This is for the high schools. Ladies and gentlemen, they've been taught to boycott Israel. The other curriculum, just like Black Lives Matter, the whole Israel's committing genocide against Palestinians, lies, right? They're not even presenting the conflict itself in a fair way. It's completely from the perspective of Hamas, of the Popular Liberation Front for the Palestinians, PFLP. This is terrorist propaganda. And it's being drilled into the minds of American students. And what follows that, ladies and gentlemen, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It's not discussed very much, and I've talked about it very much in the past. One of the reasons why it's not discussed very much is because there are progressives who control the education system. And in order for this to be shouted from the rooftops, it has to be in the media, which is, said, pretty much controlled by the left. Oh, you're being partisan. Nope, being real, being really honest. I said it before. Let me say it again. What starts to happen is we choose the different things, we pick and choose what types of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism will be discussed and what will be left alone, right? Louis Farrakhan gets up, he starts talking about the Nazis and the Jews and then boom, and then it gets a certain amount of press to a certain degree and pushed back, and rightly so, right? That same stuff is being said on college campuses all over the country. Psh, nothing, right? I said, if you made Louis Farrakhan the regent, the board of regents put him on these things, and then they would talk about it because it's Farrakhan, right? If you're not going to be real, stop, right? And this is what's happening now. These kids are being brainwashed in some of the greatest Ivy League schools and community colleges and in these high schools. And not just in California, ladies and gentlemen, this curriculum is throughout the country. If we're going to be serious about combating this type of hatred, race hatred, division, false history, propaganda been in place for curriculum, then we need to start with, for example, what's going on in California. So the letter is online. You can share it with your leaders as well. We as a unit are attempting to put pressure on the governor's office to not allow this to go forward. There's much more that can be said about what's happening there, that type of programming and propaganda that's happening in our schools, how the anti-Zionist whole apparatus, right, has worked its way through both particular high school and then in college curriculum. This is very, ladies and gentlemen, when the demonization of a people, history has taught us, when people are demonized, Black folks, we know this, our Jewish brothers and sisters know it, when people are demonized and they are dehumanized, the next step is that they are then eradicated. This is how that happens, right? And this is the danger. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and these children are being programmed with this in colleges and in lower grades as well. This must be dealt with. Both an administrative level when it comes to the school boards, when it comes to the regents at like in UC California, and other leaders of other universities. There has to be an accounting. There has to be those who are held account for the type of curriculum and propaganda, and even some of the faculty members that are coming in brainwashed. This has to be dealt with at a root cause level. It's not the student level. As I said before, I've done this for years, right? It's not about the Students for Justice in Palestine and the Muslim Students Association. Yes, sometimes, unfortunately, some of the propaganda is there, but that's not where it starts, ladies and gentlemen. It starts with the administration, with the faculty. It starts with those who are giving money for these types of things to happen. This has to be called out. Not to mention the fact that the scholastic abilities of our students here in the United States has just plummeted. The reading literacy, math literacy, all of these things. My goodness gracious. I mean, students should be learning reading, writing, arithmetic, not about free Palestine, where they need to actually be learning how to read and how to think and how to do reading comprehension. Then when they read something real about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the slave trade in Libya or the genocide of Christians in Nigeria, they can actually comprehend what's actually going on instead of being force-fed a bunch of propaganda. So I can talk about that all night long. But again, you can check that letter out so that you can be aware. Some people, as we've shared some of that information, they're not aware. Even in California, I've had educators in California tell me they weren't aware of what was actually going on. You need to be aware of what's happening, what the students are being taught. All right. I want to, there's so much here. So let me do this one other thing here. I want to move to one other thing here where Africa is concerned. There was an article that it was out in Reuters, but it's not just in Reuters. The title of the article, and Maria, I don't know if we have a screen grab of it. If you don't, it's okay. You can check it out. We can put the link there so that you can see. The title of the article is Chinese Loans to Africa Plummet to Near 2-Decade Low. Those of you who've been following well, depending on where you get your media, because some things aren't discussed as much in terms of the mainstream media. That's a whole narrative thing, which we'll talk about here in a second as well. But apparently, from multiple sources who study China, China's economy is in a little bit of a downturn right now. We've been hearing about it for a while. And one of the results of that downturn is that the loans, the multiple billions in dollars of loans, and particularly that fund the China Belt and Road Initiative that started with its work in Africa around 2013, if I'm not mistaken. China, for the lowest amount of loans to the African continent in the last 2 years. And the article goes on to talk about why and what's actually happening. We just discovered a channel called China Uncensored. It's kind of done in a kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of way, but the information seems to be fairly authentic or fairly real when it talks about what's going on with communist China, the economy, and its military, those types of things. So the comment that was made in that particular story is that though we don't wish anything bad on the Chinese people, right? The Communist Chinese Party, which has been responsible for so much mayhem, including as we now have the actual the information, all the evidence about the virus, what they called originally the Wuhan virus that was leaked from the Wuhan, the labs in Wuhan, that we actually have that our authorities have finally confirmed that this was something that China unleashed, right? So there's been so much. We go much further than that. Well, we've also on our Substack, if you go to our Substack, which is called Africa Israel Weekly, you can find it at our website, ibsi.org. Just scroll down, you'll see Africa Israel Weekly. And we've talked about, there's an article that Joshua, executive director, wrote a couple of months ago that actually deals with this whole issue of China and it's the kind of fake friendship, if you will, right? This whole the loan guarantees have come, but they've come at such a high price, right? They've come at such a steep cost, so that both the paying back of the loans, China would take the actual. There are times when they would take the ports in certain of these countries as collateral for the loans and everything, and it was almost like what we called a recolonization of the continent, right? And it's been a very, very difficult thing to observe. The African leaders have really struggled trying to pay back those loans, and there's been much debate on the continent about those loans and about how that's actually happened, right? We actually again wrote an article about it. We're saying that in the midst of this downturn, what it does, and the lesser amount of money now being lent to these African nations, and it is the lending, whether it's the IMF, whether it's other countries, that is not where the wealth would come from. It comes from the entrepreneurialism within those African nations, right? And so we're saying that that was a very interesting development. We'll be following it some more as we are seeing what's happening with China's interaction there in Africa. This could be an opportunity for some of these African nations that are so in debt to China now to actually not only not take as much in terms of loans, right, but to go further and further in erasing those debts and continuing on the prosperity that is needed for Africa, which will be the most populous continent in just a few years. By 2050, they're believing that some 1.9 billion people will be on the planet and everything. And so there's so much that's going on. It's the youngest continent, 30 years and younger, the largest population, the most Christians. It's going to be the most Muslims as well. There's so much that's happening that makes Africa this epicenter of what's going on the globe. And its indebtedness to China has been one of the many things that has been hampering. So China's difficulty right now could spell a certain amount of relief, if you will, potentially, where the African nations are concerned. So again, we'll be keeping our eye on that as we're watching the entrepreneurialism, what's going on in a very, very real way in Africa as well. So, all right, here we go. There are two stories, well, more than two. I want to let me do this here. We started the top of the hour here. We started here with telling you about the robot cops in San Francisco, there and other places as well, being armed with lethal force here probably pretty soon, and how Black Lives Matter helped destabilize those community. And I said about that one tweet. Now, if someone has some information, I don't know if Black Lives Matter has actually launched a real effort, which we would applaud. We completely, the IPSI, Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, is completely against robot cops with lethal force patrolling areas. Right, we're very concerned about what that could mean, not just in Black communities. We're talking about just in general. When we're talking about this thing about rights and human rights, and very, very concerned about what it is that we see. And even if you are a person, like we said, who's in favor of robot cops patrolling with explosives and all that type of, even if you're in favor of that, where our the concern is that the destabilization of these neighborhoods has much to do with Black Lives Matter, so-called protests, and those things that became riots, and that just became a demonization of the cops. That's part of how we got here. Part of how we got to what they're calling this wild, wild west environment is the demonization of law enforcement, the scaling back of law enforcement, the whole defund the police thing, and the homicides and violent crimes going through the roof, and these young people, 18 years and younger, paying the highest price in terms of the deaths and so much that's gone on. Well, the other part of this here, there's a story that's in the Washington Examiner that deals with this as well. Not with that specific thing, but with this issue of law enforcement and BLM, Israel, all of this, right? And that is, Maria, you can go ahead and put it up there. It's in the Washington Examiner. The name of the article is "The FBI and Treasury Must Investigate ActBlue Over Anti-Israel Funding," Issa says. This is Daryl Issa, who is one of the congressmen out of California. They're calling for an investigation that ActBlue is allowing at least one, maybe more, but at least one anti-Israel group with ties to Palestinian terrorism that has been using ActBlue for fundraising. This was in the Washington Examiner a few days ago, right? Maria, I want you to put the screen on the screen one more time. And this is it for those of you who are seeing this. This is the actual article. We have the link there as well. You can see it. There are those in Congress that are calling for an investigation. And then you read the article, it actually talks about, again, the PFLP. And there's one in particular, I think I do want to see that. There's one Palestinian terrorism aligned organization in particular, and it has an acronym. I want to make sure I get the acronym right. It's called the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic Cultural Boycott of Israel, the PACBI, the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. This is the organization that they say has been doing fundraising on ActBlue and has ties to Palestinian terrorism. They are calling for this investigation. The reason I mentioned Black Lives Matter, because again, Black Lives Matter also does fundraising on ActBlue. As a matter of fact, when that was found out, ActBlue said that they had removed it from the platform. But as of the other day, you do a Google search, ActBlue, BLM, and sure enough, boom, you can donate to different parts of BLM's organization, the Global Network Foundation, all these different things. It's still on there, even though ActBlue said that they had removed it. So they're not even telling the truth about that. So the terrorism part of it here, if I look in here, it says that I want to see something here on there. Then ties terrorism. Yeah. So it is the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committee that actually is writing this, and they're writing to Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI. And ladies and gentlemen, I can't. So again, it's being alleged that a pro-BDS group with ties, which is somewhat redundant to Palestinian terrorism, is fundraising on the Progressive ActBlue. And ActBlue in its beginning said it's there for progressive causes and candidates, right? So those of you talking about being partisan, like I said, about what's going on the college campuses, and because it's run by progressives, it doesn't get talked about. But it's a bunch of white supremacists and far right people that are doing on the campuses that would get talked about, and rightly so, needs to be talked about, right? Not saying that they'll talk about all of it, right? So the Progressive ActBlue is allegedly allowing a pro-BDS anti-Israel organization with terrorist ties to do fundraising. just like BLM is an anti-Israel organization that promotes BDS, that lies about Israel, say it is committing genocide, all these types of things. This is where the fundraising was taking place, and it still is taking place now. And let me say this, please. I've seen some of the folks out there talking about, oh, BLM is dead, BLM is no more. BLM is alive and kicking. I won't pull it up now, but just a couple of months ago, they were out the article themselves. They asked me, no, we're fine, we got money, we're good. Ladies and gentlemen, do not believe it, right? When the time seems right to them to come back in with the anti-Israel stuff, or repackage it. And why? Because the purpose was never about human rights. It was never about justice in Black communities. None of those things. It was always about the demonization of Israel and the exploitation of the Black community. And it pays so well. Don't get me started on Ibrahim X. Kendi, that whole thing that's blown up here about the whole anti-racist stuff and the millions of dollars and his former employees and yada, yada, yada. It's a great, ladies and gentlemen, it's one of the race hustle is one of the oldest ones. Booker T. Washington in 1911 basically said that some of these people, and I can almost quote it verbatim, do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they don't want to lose their jobs. That was the turn of the 20th century, 1911. So however many years ago, 100 plus years ago, that founding father of the Black community knew exactly what he's talking about. He says some folks ain't fighting for justice. They just want things to be bad and even seem worse so they can make money on the suffering of the people. They can say, oh, look at this suffering, donate to here, right? This is what we're talking about. When people say, why are you fighting Israel? You're just a grift. We don't make money from this, ladies and gentlemen. We get donors and actually use it for what we say we're using it for. But our family and those who work with us, everything, through great sacrifice of their own, do it. And again, don't say that as a complaint. Glad to do it. Want to do it, but don't get it twisted, right? Talk about the grift is the Palestine. Goodness gracious. Khalid Masha'al, the former head of the Hamas, years ago, almost 10 years ago, was worth $2.6 billion. Who knows what he's worth now, right? It's just, I mean, all that money, you done money from Iran, money from Qatar. Are you guys kidding me? I remember Khalid Abu Twame, the Arab-Israeli journalist, who award-winning journalist, right? I mean, just tells the truth, right? Khalid does amazing work. If you don't know him, Google him, or if we have a link to him, Ray, on his Twitter, you can put it on there as well. And I remember he shared with our groups, he's spoken to so many different groups over the years, and he was talking about when he was a young Arab reporter, he worked with the pool of reporters with the PLO. And his problem was that he would tell the truth. He would go out there on the beat, see what was going on, and report on the Palestinian abuses of the people, Palestinian people. And he learned really quickly they didn't want him. That's not what they wanted him to do, right? If it's bad about Israel, say that, right? And even within the industry, he talked about it. The CNNs, all the other ones, they would access him if he had something bad to say about Israel, right? But if he was telling what was going on with Hamas, with Fatah, the PLO, they didn't want to hear that, right? The offers would dry up, right? There's money to be made if you're willing to sit there and spout off about Israel, right? So it's really real. For those who don't recognize it, you don't know, man, I could do a whole discussion just on that. The billions of dollars. How do you think all that anti-Israel stuff on the college campuses? You have governments like Qatar that pay for the Arab studies departments, and oftentimes it's a bunch of propaganda. It's going to be Arab studies, fine. Nothing wrong with Arab studies, but let it be Arab studies. Why? What is it about the anti-Israel, right? That's what's going on. This is the ActBlue, that story. Go ahead and check it out there. Again, it's in the Washington Examiner. Very good story. And we'll be following that story as well. Because they want the FBI to investigate, and this is why our law enforcement and our those three-letter organizations. I mean, that's why they can't be partisan, right? They can't be playing games like that, right? Going to investigate and run raids on these people, but all this stuff's going on over here. We act like it's not going on, right? This is why people will lose their faith in those institutions, because they see they're not about justice, they're about an agenda, right? And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to this whole Israel agenda, oftentimes it's anti-Zionist, or they look the other way when it's anti-Zionist, right? So this is actually happening on that level as well. And it's going to bring me to this other thing here. Goodness gracious. So Maria, I'm going to have to do this in a certain type of way, because I stepped into this in a way that's going to let me talk about this particular issue. And I want to do it with Sure. Let's. I want to skip the Zelenskyy one, and I should. Well, let's see. Do I have enough time? I'm gonna see if I can squeeze them in. Let's do them both. Okay, let's do Zelenskyy first. All right. So real quick, the president of Ukraine, along with the Prime Minister of Canada, a couple of days ago. And Maria, if you have that video, I'm gonna get ready to load that up. They had a very, very embarrassing situation in which they all together honored a member of the Nazi, the World War II Nazi veteran. And that's the beginning of it, right? It gets worse from there. So Maria, if you have that on there, let's go ahead and check and roll that video, that MP4, if you have that on there. Let's check that out. If it's there. If not, then I'll do it a different way. But I want them to see what happened both in the parliament the other day and then what was the apology from the prime minister. Go ahead, let's do that.
So this week, anybody who's in the United States, which I guess makes me nobody here in
if you have the other one that we sent, just in case a little bit of technical difficulty, y'all, that was Caroline Glick, my friend. I might be able to get to that one. But if you don't have it, it's okay. I'll give it to you in this other type of form. You got it. Go ahead. Let's go unroll it.
Invited by House Speaker Anthony Rota to witness Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's address to Parliament, Yaroslav Hunka is one of his constituents.
He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service.
That was the jubilant scene Friday. Now new details have emerged about that war service MPs applauded. Hunka served in the 1st Galician Division, a voluntary unit commanded by the Nazis.
The unit is complicit in the Holocaust.
This Jewish human rights campaigner says there's no defending former soldiers like Hunka.
You swore allegiance to Hitler, and you were involved with the massacre of civilians. So it doesn't matter if you try and claim that you were defending against communism, you were still involved with the Nazi war machine.
The division's history is murky. Its volunteers united by a desire to take on the Soviet Union, says this academic.
For them, the ultimate evil was Moscow occupation.
Rota has now apologized and says he regrets ever inviting him. I recognize an individual in the gallery. I have subsequently become aware of more information which causes me to regret my decision to do so, he says in a statement. I accept full responsibility for my actions. Still, the opposition is asking how this could happen. The Prime Minister's office says it wasn't aware the Speaker had invited Hunka, saying in a statement, no advance notice was provided to the Prime Minister's office, nor the Ukrainian delegation, about the invitation or the recognition.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened. The Speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and, by extension, to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
Those of you both on Clubhouse and those of you on Instagram Live, what that last snippet that you heard was Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And where do I even start? So the Parliament hosted Vladimir Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, and the whole purpose of this event was to express their support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. And in that particular event, they also honored this man who's a 98-year-old veteran Nazi of the Nazi military, right? And not only the Nazi military, but that particular regiment, among the most notorious, right, for genocide and all kinds of just inhuman practices, right? So they apologized for it, and in Justin Trudeau's apology, he invokes Russian propaganda and disinformation. So it's not a real apology, meaning Russian disinformation, which is legendary. I mean, I read my book talks about Zionism, Back to Church, talks about the KGB disinformation, those type of things, but no. The fact Prime Minister Trudeau, that you all honored a Nazi World War II veteran is not the fault of Russian disinformation. It has nothing to do with Russian disinformation. It is you who made the mistake, as it were. So for you to quote unquote apologize for honoring a Nazi and then invoke Russian disinformation and propaganda, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, continues to go down this road of propaganda and disinformation, because those two have nothing to do with each other. If Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, you all honored a Nazi and you really want to make amends for that, and particularly during Yom Kippur, actually say, hey, my bad, then say that. What does that have to do with Russian propaganda and disinformation? Unless you're trying to gaslight people and say this dude wasn't really a Nazi, that's just Russian disinformation and propaganda. This is unfortunately where we are, ladies and gentlemen, which, yep, is going to lead me to my last thing. So that we put that link, we put those videos together. The one of them is by the CBC news service, and then there's the other one was just this video that was placed up on Twitter. We just put those together so you can see that, because the theme here, ladies and gentlemen, is the disinformation and the propaganda, right? And it's also that's why there's a article that's about it in the forward. The Jewish Forward actually did an article about what actually happened, and you can see that link there on the screen there. You can check that out there. It's called Zelenskyy Joins Canadian Parliament's Ovation of a 98-year-old veteran who fought with the Nazis. And it was a volunteer regiment as well, a volunteer group. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, and people are telling us, oh, I need to say this. So whenever, not in any way looking past Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the countless thousands of people who have died, it's horrific what's going on, right? But when the issue of Nazi presence in Ukraine came up, people had conniption fits as if that were propaganda, and it's not. It's true. As a matter of fact, the mainstream press was doing stories on it. I mean, Time magazine, all different. They were actually writing about this, and not only that as Nazis, but as a recruitment where other Nazis were coming to be trained there in Ukraine. This was actually happening, right? That had nothing to do with co-signing or paying no attention to what Russia was doing, but everything to do with what was telling about what was actually going on, right? So whenever Ipsy would post information about that, there would be some, not a lot, but there'd be some who would push back and say we were spewing Russian propaganda. No, we weren't. And often the links would just be the same mainstream media outlets that act like now it's Russian propaganda, right? So what happens? The people who are discussing the war with Ukraine and Russia honor a Nazi in the Canadian Parliament, and Justin Trudeau gets up and talks about Russian disinformation. This is a clown world, ladies and gentlemen, and it makes everyone less safe. That if we're not going to acknowledge that presence, just like we acknowledge whether it's ISIS, as we acknowledge any other types of extremist groups, everything, then we are doing ourselves a grave disservice. Goodness gracious. So Ipsy persisted in telling the truth, just like we tell the truth about during World War II, there were black soldiers that helped free Jews from the camps, the death camps. We shared the information, and we've done it before, from the Holocaust Encyclopedia, and about the soldiers who took pictures of these camps that were liberated. And my God, many of the pictures that the world saw, that the U.S. commanders made them take pictures of so everybody could see, were taken by black photographers, right? There was this role that black Americans played along with all the others in America and the Allied powers in defeating Hitler. So if we're going to wink and nod at certain Nazis and then have conniption fits about other Nazis, it makes it so dangerous. These are dangerous games being played. It's as if we've learned nothing from the past. So I needed to share that with you so that you could see. I don't. This connects to this other one. One of the conversations that we're having pretty consistently as a staff, which I can't unpack now, is IPSI's advocacy and its role in that space. How we, as Black voices, best use those voices for Black Jewish synergy to combat true racism and true anti-Semitism and Israel hatred, right? Not what often gets passed off for it, and that's another discussion for another day. But what's really happening, the roots of what's actually happening, how we best do that. And we are in a very intense time, ladies and gentlemen, in our nation, in the global community. I have said often that, like Charles Dickens said in the Christmas Carol, not Christmas Carol, I'm sorry, Charles Dickens said, the best of times, the worst of times, and now the actual title is failing me. When he opened up the story, we are in the best of times, worst of times now. Here you have a real spreading peace in the regions of Middle East and Africa, right? It was just announced that the Democratic Republic of Congo will be opening its embassy in Jerusalem, as several other African nations have announced. As Papua New Guinea from Asia, they announced this is an amazing time. According to the prince himself, Saudi Arabia and Israel are closer than ever, maybe, can say it that way, on some sort of normalization, to the point where Khalid Masha'al, the head of Hamas, says we condemn. It was Khalid Abu Twami, the journalist I told you about, tweeted the quote from the head of Hamas saying they condemn the Arab world making peace with Israel. We condemn the Arab normalization with Israel. It was kind of like a joke, right? Because business is good for him. This dude's worth billions, right? But peace is not good business for terrorists. Can I say it again? Peace for people who want instability, the Marxists, the communists, the Nazis, the people who want mayhem so that they can be in charge. Peace is not a good thing for them. Peace, they want it. They want the mayhem so that they can wrest control. So, as peace spreads in the region after the brilliant Abraham Accords, I shared with you last week how there are African-American imams who traveled to Israel helping to promote peace. It's something that's gaining momentum. This is a wonderful thing, right? We're seeing the Africa-Israel relationship just on so many different levels, right? Coordinating with counterterrorism and coordinating with water security and food security and all these things. It's just growing, right? It's a good thing. It's a great thing. Meanwhile, particularly in the Western world, the Jew hatred, the Israel hatred, the indoctrination of the students, this fundraising possible fiasco with all this stuff is going on. I mean, for terrorist groups or groups that are aligned with terrorism against Israel, you have these real things happening, particularly in the West, that give much cause and concern and pause. And you have in Israel, in which, because of judicial reform and other things, it is very contentious. I'm reading, we have many Israeli friends and everything. Bibi Netanyahu, I'm sorry, I moved my camera like that, my apologies. Bibi Netanyahu was here, I guess he went back for the High Holy Days, obviously for Yom Kippur, but he was here in Israel, here in the United States for last week. Met with Elon Musk out there in California, did a forum and everything, did some sort of the discussion about everything from AI to anti-Semitism on Twitter, on X, spoke at the United Nations, had some other meetings and everything. And like in San Francisco, for example, some I guess they were American Jewish groups that are against Bibi. They put a projection of him on Alcatraz. Bibi welcomed Alcatraz, had him in an orange jumpsuit hey, it's a free country. Say what you need to say. Do what you want to do. That's what you want to do. You're protesting what you spoken. But the article that we shared, and I'm not gonna have time, Maria, to do the other quote thing, but I'm just gonna. We shared an article earlier this week by Alan Dershowitz, and Maria, if you want to, you can put it's on the Facebook page, and I didn't give our producers this thing. I'm just kind of having to talk this through here for a minute. And Alan Dershowitz wrote an article condemning a group of, or criticizing a group of reform and conservative rabbis who were planning to, and I believe they did, protesting Bibi Netanyahu at the United Nations. Ipsy shared that article, and it's the first thing that we have done publicly that in any way even approaches the judicial reform. Ipsy has no comment on judicial reform in Israel any more than we have any comment on what the ANC is doing with the economy in South Africa, that type of thing. We talk about Israel things, right? But these are sovereign nations, and the people there, and if they're democracies, then the people need to decide, right? And then the same thing with Israel, what they decide, right? How their elections, we don't comment on any of that, right? That's for Israel to decide, and I can go further than that too. Sometimes people will ask us, why don't you say something about this? And this goes throughout, right? We've had people who've asked us whenever it was, there was controversy. Particularly a few years ago, there's a young Ethiopian Israeli who was shot and killed by an Israeli law enforcement, and there's a big controversy, and there was riots and protests and all those other types of things. And some came to us and, why doesn't Ipsy say XYZ? Because those are internal Israeli affairs. And some people got frustrated and we said, no, our approach is the same, right? Israel is a democracy, and if there are things that are going there that even speak to an injustice, that is for the Israelis to actually address. It's not for outside people to address, no matter what we might think or feel about it, right? And I have, for years, I've had friends with Israeli friends, and there's different. I've heard all kinds of different stories. And Jews, Ethiopian Israelis, those are Ashkenazi, the other Mizrahi community, and talk about the bureaucracy they've dealt with, different things like that. So we don't publish those things because there's plenty of Israel critics. Now, I don't mean not the real critics. Now I'm talking about the Al Jazeera's, the Mondo Ice, Electronic Intifada. There's plenty of that happens 24/7. That's not Ipsy's focus. Our focus is for whether it's solidarity, whether it's actually telling the truth about things that are lied about. I'm not afraid to say whatever. Grown men, we'll say what we need to say, but we stay away from certain things, not because Israel's some sort of wallflower, but because it has been our focus from the beginning of our existence in 2013, that there are certain things that we don't address because in the public square, don't address it in the public square because those are internal Israeli situations, even though we have Israeli friends and we'll be talking and we'll be sharing different information about what's happening in as much as we can inside, right? That having been said, when the rabbis here in America decided that they were going to protest Bibi at the United Nations, we shared Alan Dershowitz's article because of how it resonated. All of the human rights abuses that the United Nations is supposed to address, the slaughtering in the Congo that happened, particularly between 1995 and 2005, 5 million plus, hardly a peep. The ongoing genocide of Christians in Nigeria. Where's the United Nations Human Rights Council? And I can go on and on and on. We were very disappointed to see reform and conservative rabbis make this announcement to protest Bibi at the United Nations. This is not about judicial reform. We have no comment on that. But when it comes to how Israel is demonizing the United Nations and all these other nations that are paying for the United Nations' own dereliction of duty, we shared Alan Dershowitz's article for that reason. That with all of the human rights abuses that are not being addressed and the way that Israel, that is always being addressed in the United Nations, to actually protest the Prime Minister of Israel at the United Nations, wow, just wow. This is why we shared that article. we're going to go further on this topic because as contentious as things are on a world scale, again, our Israeli friends, there's the big fight where judicial reform is concerned and the forward progress of the nation. And again, that's for the Israelis to actually contend for themselves. What that actually means here in the States, like without sharing the article, and then the Israeli pilots who went on 60 Minutes the other day to tell the world and infer, I should say, to the world that Israeli pilots are ordered to shoot Palestinian children. That is not true. Caroline Glick, one of our friends and colleagues, she went on her podcast and she actually talked about it. And so the advocacy part for IPSI is morphing into a couple of different things, which we'll have to pick up on that a little bit more on next week. Because we see that this contention that's happening now in the States more and more, where the types of blood libels that are being lobbed at Israel are coming, unfortunately, from certain segments of the American Jewish community, we foresee that this is not going to abate anytime soon. What we're seeing is that, unfortunately, this is going to continue before it stops. It's going to... There are all signs point to this actually ramping up. And this will impact how we do some of what we do as the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. No less of a commitment for this Africa-Israel Black Jewish Alliance. Our commitment has not wavered, but we recognize that as things are unfolding in a very, very volatile way, it is causing us to have to strategize in a unique way. And so I'll stop there. I had another link I was going to share, but we'll get into that going on over time here. This has been the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. I'm Dumisani Washington, the founder and CEO. You can go to ibsi.org and find out more information about our organization. We are here every Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern. I hope for all my Jewish brothers and sisters, you all had a meaningful fast at the end of Yom Kippur. We will be here again next week, I believe, hosting by and Olga and some different ones, you never know what you're going to get. But we are going to be having this conversation. When I'm talking about the whole Israel IPSI's approach to what's going on, that's going to be a longer conversation. Plus, you'll see some other those things as well. You're going to see what we're talking about. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on all of our streaming. Again, every Monday, 8 p.m., we're here for the Institute Black Solidarity with Israel Forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. I'm Washington. Thank you so much for joining us. See you all next week.